Welcome, classic rock fans, to my response to the 2021 nominees from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm a bit late to the party on this one, I must admit, as I wasn't going to respond at all. As I generally do not give a fly. I couldn't care less about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But you have been needling me for a response, so I thought I'd record one. Francis Bacon said that fortitude is the marshal of thought and the armour of the will. And I must admit, I always feel the need to brace myself whenever I hear there's an imminent announcement from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on anything. The institution has said in order to be nominated, an artist has to demonstrate an unquestionable musical excellence and talent. Inductees will have had a significant impact on the development, evolution and preservation of rock. The idea of a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is great in theory, but in reality it's seriously flawed. It tends to be more a polarising entity, in my opinion. The Rolling Stones famously sang "It's only rock and roll," and therein lies the rub, because it just simply isn't. It has to be said that a lot of what goes into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is simply not that. I suppose it depends how tight or how thin you want to stretch that very definition. And it has to be said the nominees this year are pretty diverse, and it's quite possible that this is the major consideration rather than the spirit or the essence of rock and roll. I mean, why should we let that get in the way of a good award? There are a lot of artists, of course, that are from the areas of hip-hop and R&B and more urban textures, shall we say. I mean, don't get me wrong, these guys are probably excellent in their field. It's just a field that I would prefer to be as far away from my house as possible. And yes, you could make the point that, rock and roll comes from an essentially black idiom. It's a point Lester Bangs used to make. He calls it that African-American idiom, especially with blues and jazz and R&B. So that's the argument perhaps for including it all under the banner of rock and roll. I suppose the suggestion here is that musically and generically we're all kind of pissing into the same pot. Mind you, that being said, if you were to try and nominate Judas Priest for inclusion in a kind of R&B or hip-hop equivalent, I don't think you would be taken seriously. It just wouldn't fly, would it? So out of the 16 nominees this year, 7 are women. There's R&B and hip-hop artists, an African legend, and a soul diva as well. So let's think about the artists that have been nominated. There's Todd Rundgren, of course, who thoroughly deserves a place. He's one of the most unique and eclectic artists of the 20th century, in my opinion. I think as an artist he has to be included, from the psychedelic rock of his band Utopia to the ingenuity of some of the stuff he's done since then. But not only that, his work as an engineer and producer has to be lauded as well, with bands like XTC and Patti Smith off the top of my head. Admittedly, he's one of those artists that tends to hover beneath most people's radar, but he's certainly responsible for some seriously good pop tune-smithery as well. I mean, songs like "Hello, It's Me" and "I Saw the Light," he definitely has to go in. And we get the Go-Go's, of course. They've been nominated, all-female quartet. No, I think they should go in, really. They should play their own instruments and write their own songs, and I think they paid their dues as well, even been asked to pose in their underwear, I think, for the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. Many have insisted, of course, that they were an inspiration for a lot of female acts that followed. Even the atrocity that was the Spice Girls has been an act that's been kind of laid at their door. But nevertheless, it was a door that they kicked open for a lot of future female artists that came after them. And Carole King, of course, has been nominated. Now, I thought she was in there already. Well, she's kind of in there with her husband, Jerry Goffin, who wrote lots of wonderful melodies and songs in the 60s. Excellent stuff, including the Locomotion, which, of course, has been covered by everybody from Grand Funk Railroad to Kylie Minogue. Of course, she's in here as a singer-songwriter whose music was unique and timeless, in my opinion. Tapestry is a great album which sits on everybody's shelf, I think. I feel honoured to have seen her perform the whole album live a few years ago in London. And Tina Turner has been nominated, another one who I'm really surprised is not already in there. Again, like Carole King, she is actually in there with her husband Ike. But of course she's here, she's being honoured for her solo material, which was phenomenally successful after she broke away from that very abusive relationship. But there's no doubt in my mind that she should be in there. Fela Kuti, who's an African legend and remarkable musician, has been nominated. Huge influence on artists like Peter Gabriel and Paul Simon. His experimentation with certain rhythms and producing beguiling, hypnotic melange of sounds, overlaid horns, guitars and keyboards, was absolutely remarkable. It was a gorgeous soup of textures, a fusion of jazz and funk. Now, you could argue that perhaps he's not rock and roll and shouldn't be in there, but I think he deserves some sort of recognition. Tragically, he died due to complications related to AIDS in 1997, aged 58. The New York Dolls have also been nominated. I'm not sure they'll get in. I think they only had about 2 albums out as well. A very influential act, very much like the Stooges. But I'd love to see them get in, actually. I don't think they will, though. Of course, Iron Maiden have been nominated to get in, the kind of token metal band. And we all know how much the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame loves metal. I'd be very surprised if they get in. Kate Bush has been nominated, of course, and I think she should go in. She's an absolute genius. Rock and roll, well, she has skated in that particular arena. We get songs like James and the Cold Gun, I think it was called, and songs like The Wedding List and Violin off Never Forever. I mean, they were quite rocky tunes. I think she's deserving of a place, and although her music is more experimental, avant-garde, progressive, nevertheless, I do think the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame would be richer for having her in there. Of course, we get Devo, who have been nominated, and I'll be honest with you, I don't really know how I feel about this. I don't know much about them. I'm never really sure how to take their music. I'm not adverse to the idea of them going in. I'm just kind of sat on the fence on this one. Then we get a lot of artists, from the paradigms that is R&B and hip-hop. Artists like Chaka Khan, Mary J. Blige, LL Cool J. I'll refer you to the answer I gave before on these guys. I really don't know why they're going in. And Dion Warwick has been nominated. Exceptional, legendary artist, there's no doubt about that. But we have to ask ourselves, do we really think she belongs in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Also getting nominated are Rage Against the Machine and the Foo Fighters. 2 excellent bands who are worthy of inclusion in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But I'm not so sure they should go in just yet. I think there are great legacy artists that perhaps need to be included before these guys. Huge fan of the Foo Fighters. I love them dearly. In fact, Dave Grohl's already in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, in with Nirvana, if I'm not mistaken. But generally, these 2 artists, I'd kind of make them wait a little bit longer. I have to wonder why some of these artists are going in when there's certain legacy artists that have, as far as I know, not yet been nominated. I mean, Brian Eno, for example, Nick Drake, Pat Benatar, the Smiths, Kraftwerk, Jethro Tull even. I'm reminded of a quote by Lyndon B. Johnson that said, "Tomorrow is ours to win or lose." And as a classic rock aficionado, I really feel that I'm on a losing streak here. Anyway, that's my response to the nominees for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 2021. Just leaves me to say I hope you're all staying safe, keeping warm, and more importantly, you keep listening.